More than 220 million years ago, a large predator moved through the floodplains of what is now North America. Its body was carried high above the ground. Its hind limbs were powerfully built. A deep skull ended in jaws armed with serrated teeth. From a distance, it could easily be mistaken for a predatory dinosaur. But this animal was Postosuchus, and Postosuchus was not a dinosaur. It belonged to the other great branch of the archosaur family, the lineage more closely related to crocodiles. Because the Triassic was filled with animals that appear familiar, yet do not belong where we expect them to. There were reptiles resembling crocodiles that were not crocodiles, armored herbivores that looked like early ankylosaurs but stood on the crocodilian side of the family tree, giant amphibians waiting beneath the surface of rivers, mammal relatives as large as elephants, marine reptiles growing to the dimensions of whales, and somewhere among all of them were the first dinosaurs, small, lightly built, and initially far from dominant. The Triassic period lasted from approximately 251.9 to 201.4 million years ago. It was the first period of the Mesozoic era, positioned between two mass extinctions. Its beginning belonged to the survivors of the greatest biological catastrophe in Earth's history. Its ending would decide which animals inherited the Jurassic. And for most of those 50 million years, the world did not belong to the dinosaurs. To understand the Triassic, we must begin with an animal that did not look particularly impressive. Lastrosaurus had a barrel-shaped body, short limbs, a beak, and in many species a pair of tusks projecting from the upper jaw. It was not a reptile in the strict evolutionary sense. Lystrosaurus was a dicynodont, a member of the synapsid lineage that would eventually produce mammals. Its ancestors had lived during the Permian, when synapsids occupied many of the dominant terrestrial roles. But at the end of that period, life came close to collapse. Massive volcanic activity associated with the Siberian traps released enormous quantities of greenhouse gases. Temperatures rose, rainfall patterns changed. Oceans became warmer, more acidic, and increasingly depleted of oxygen. On land, forests declined and food webs disintegrated. The Permian Triassic extinction eliminated the majority of species then living on Earth. Yet Lystrosaurus survived. Its fossils have been recovered from South Africa, India, China, Russia, and Antarctica. These continents are now widely separated, but during the Triassic they were joined within the supercontinent Pangaea. The first Triassic landscapes were not immediately filled by diverse new life. Recovery occurred in stages. Some groups diversified quickly, but stable and complex food webs took millions of years to return. Lystrosaurus was one of evolution's great survivors, but it also lived in a world where survival had become almost the only achievement that mattered. The Triassic was not uniformly desert. There were forests, river valleys, floodplains, and humid coastal regions. But many environments were shaped by the repeated movement between drought and rainfall, a global pattern influenced by the immense geography of Pangaea. And in the rivers created by those seasonal rains, ancient predators were waiting. A large animal approaches the edge of a Triassic lake. The surface appears still. Then the water erupts. A broad, flattened skull rises from below. Jaws close around the struggling animal, and the predator disappears once more into the murky water. This is Mastodonsaurus, one of the great temnospondyl amphibians of the Middle Triassic. Its skull alone could exceed a meter in length. The head was wide and flattened, with the eyes positioned towards the upper surface. This arrangement was well suited to an animal waiting mostly submerged, observing what moved above the water. Mastodonsaurus was not designed for chasing prey over long distances. Its proportions suggest an aquatic or semi-aquatic ambush predator, capturing fish and other vertebrates that entered its range. The existence of animals such as Mastodonsaurus reminds us that the early Mesozoic was not immediately dominated by reptiles. In many freshwater ecosystems, giant amphibians remained important predators. The Triassic world was being rebuilt, but it remained unstable. And while giant amphibians held the rivers, another evolutionary group was beginning one of the most remarkable radiations in vertebrate history. Today, only two branches of the Archosaur family remain alive. One is represented by crocodilians. The other is represented by birds. Their last common ancestor lived more than 240 million years ago. By the Middle Triassic, the two great branches were already following very different evolutionary paths. On one side were the pseudosuchians, the crocodile line archosaurs. On the other were the avametatarsalia, the bird-line archosaurs, including the ancestors of pterosaurs and dinosaurs. This division is not based merely on overall appearance. Paleontologists reconstruct it using detailed combinations of features in the skull, pelvis, ankle, and limbs. The crocodile line branch was especially diverse during the Triassic. It included lightly built runners, heavily armored herbivores, sail-backed forms, and enormous terrestrial predators. The bird line branch initially contained smaller and less conspicuous animals. Some were only slightly larger than modern chickens. Yet this branch would eventually produce pterosaurs, dinosaurs, and much later, birds. The contrast between them is one of the central stories of the Triassic. Modern crocodilians can give the impression of an ancient lineage that changed very little. But they are only the remaining survivors of a radiation that once produced an astonishing variety of forms. During the Triassic, the crocodile side of the Archosaur family was not restricted to rivers. It was everywhere. Across a dry floodplain, a heavily armored animal moves slowly between patches of vegetation. Its back is covered by rows of bony plates called osteoderms. This is an aetosaur. At first glance, it resembles a combination of a crocodile, an armadillo, and an ankylosaur. But aetosaurs appeared long before ankylosaurs and evolved their armor independently. Their skulls were relatively small, often ending in an upturned or expanded snout. This has led to reconstructions showing them digging into soft soil for roots and underground plant material. But their diet is not completely settled. The teeth and jaws of many aetosaurs appear compatible with herbivory, while certain anatomical studies leave open the possibility of omnivory in at least some forms. They lived alongside dicynodonts, rhynchosaurs, early dinosaurs, and large predators. Their fossils are found across regions that were once widely connected within Pangaea, including North America, South America, Europe, Africa, and India. To many predators, an adult aetosaur would have presented a difficult target, but the floodplains also contained hunters that were shaped by water rather than armor. Animals so crocodile-like that for many years their true identity remained concealed behind their appearance. A long snout rests just above the surface of a Triassic river. The body is largely hidden. Only the head and a pair of raised nostrils remain exposed. The resemblance to a modern crocodile is extraordinary, but this animal is a phytosaur, phytosaurs were not true crocodilians. Depending on the evolutionary analysis, they are placed either near the base of the crocodile line radiation or just outside the crown group Archosauria. Modern crocodilians carry their nostrils near the tip of the snout. In phytosaurs, the nostrils were positioned much farther back, often close to the eyes. Their skulls demonstrate convergent evolution, the process through which unrelated animals develop similar adaptations because they face similar environmental demands. A long, low body helps an aquatic hunter remain close to the surface. Eyes and nostrils positioned towards the top of the head allow it to observe and breathe while much of the body stays concealed. An elongated jaw is effective for seizing fast-moving prey. Natural selection repeatedly arrived at variations of this design, first in phytosaurs, later in true crocodilians. Triassic rivers therefore contained something recognizably crocodilian millions of years before modern crocodilian forms became established. But away from the water, the dominant predators were even more imposing. The late Triassic floodplains of North America supported several large terrestrial hunters. Among the best known was Postosuchus. Its skull was deep rather than narrow, with large openings that reduced weight while preserving surfaces for powerful jaw muscles. Its limbs were positioned more directly beneath the body than those of many sprawling reptiles. This allowed the animal to carry its weight efficiently and move with greater terrestrial competence. Postosuchus belonged to a broad collection of large predatory pseudosuchians, historically called rauisuchians. The term remains useful descriptively, but these animals probably do not form one simple natural evolutionary group. Other giant predators included Saurosuchus in South America and Prestosuchus in Brazil. They were not merely temporary substitutes waiting for dinosaurs to arrive. They were successful predators in their own right. Their prey included pterosaurs, dicynodonts, rhynchosaurs, and perhaps early dinosaurs. In many late Triassic environments, the largest carnivore was not a dinosaur but a crocodile-line archosaur. This distinction is essential. Dinosaurs did not enter an empty world. The terrestrial ecosystems of the Triassic were already occupied by animals with efficient locomotion, specialized feeding adaptations, and millions of years of evolutionary history. To become dominant, dinosaurs would first have to survive among them. In rocks from the Ischigualasto Formation of Argentina, paleontologists have recovered some of the most complete early dinosaur skeletons ever discovered. Among them are Herrerasaurus and Eoraptor. Herrerasaurus was a bipedal predator with long hind limbs, grasping hands, and a lightly constructed skeleton. It could reach several meters in length, but it was still smaller than some of the great pseudo-Suchian hunters living during the Triassic. Eoraptor was considerably smaller. Its combination of teeth and skeletal features suggests that it occupied a more generalized ecological role. Its exact position within the earliest dinosaur family tree has changed between analyses, but it remains one of the most informative animals from the early radiation of dinosaurs. These animals lived approximately 230 million years ago. Possible dinosaur relatives and footprints suggest that the broader dinosaur stem lineage had originated by the Middle Triassic, and perhaps earlier. But the oldest widely accepted dinosaur skeletons come primarily from the late Triassic rocks of South America and Africa. The rise of dinosaurs was unlikely to have resulted from one revolutionary adaptation. It was a prolonged ecological process. The evidence points not to an instant takeover, but to a lineage gradually expanding across a world that was still controlled by its competitors. And even defining where the first true dinosaur begins is more complicated than it appears. By the late Triassic, the skies above Pangaea contained the first vertebrates capable of powered flight. They were the pterosaurs. Pterosaurs were close relatives of dinosaurs, but they were not dinosaurs themselves. Their wings were constructed in a way unlike those of birds or bats. A membrane of skin and supporting tissues extended along the forelimb, with much of its outer edge supported by an enormously elongated fourth finger. Early pterosaurs such as Eudimorphodon, Preondactylus and Patinosaurus were generally smaller than many of their later Jurassic and Cretaceous descendants. Most had long tails and jaws containing numerous teeth. Their skeletons were light and fragile, making them less likely to fossilize. The earliest definite pterosaurs already possessed fully developed wings, which creates a gap between them and their flightless ancestors. Recent anatomical analyses increasingly connect pterosaurs with small Triassic animals called lagopetids. These close relatives were not flyers, but their sensory systems and limb anatomy may help illuminate the transition towards the pterosaur condition. The fossil record remains incomplete, and the exact sequence through which powered flight evolved is still being investigated. But by the late Triassic, the transformation had already occurred. Archosaurs had spread across the land, they had entered the rivers, and now they had reached the sky. Meanwhile, an equally dramatic radiation was taking place beneath the surface of the oceans. Not long after the Permian extinction, reptiles began returning to the sea. Among the most successful were the ichthyosaurs. Their bodies eventually became streamlined, with paddle-like limbs, large eyes and tails, adapted for propulsion. Later forms developed profiles superficially resembling dolphins or tuna, but this similarity was another case of convergence. Ichthyosaurs were reptiles. Their ancestors had lived on land and breathed air. Even after becoming fully marine, they had to surface to breathe. Unlike sea turtles, they did not need to return to land to lay eggs. Fossils preserve embryos within the bodies of adults and even individuals, apparently dying during birth, demonstrating that ichthyosaurs gave birth to live young in the water. The speed of their evolution was extraordinary. Within only a few million years of their earliest known appearance, ichthyosaurs had produced enormous forms. One Middle Triassic species, Symbospondylus youngorum, is estimated to have exceeded 17 meters in length. It lived at most around 8 million years after the emergence of the earliest known ichthyosaurs. Whales required tens of millions of years to reach comparable dimensions. Ichthyosaurs achieved gigantism far more rapidly. The existence of giant ichthyosaurs shows that at least some Middle Triassic marine ecosystems had already recovered sufficient complexity and productivity to support enormous vertebrate consumers. Yet ichthyosaurs were only one experiment in returning to the sea. Other reptiles evolved completely different solutions. A small animal emerges after sunset. Its body is low to the ground. Its skull is elongated, and its jaws contain several types of teeth rather than one repeated shape. This is a cynodont. Cynodonts belonged to the synapsid lineage. They were relatives of Lystrosaurus, but they stood much closer to the origin of mammals. Some Triassic cynodonts, such as Cynognathus, were relatively large predators. Others were small insectivores or omnivores living beneath the ecological presence of archosaurs. Within their skeletons, several mammalian features were developing gradually. The teeth became increasingly differentiated into incisors, canines, and postcanine teeth with more complex surfaces. The dentary, the principal tooth-bearing bone of the lower jaw, became larger. At the same time, the smaller bones behind it were reduced. Eventually, the mammalian jaw would consist primarily of a single dentary bone on each side, while the former jaw elements became part of a highly sensitive auditory system. Fur is rarely preserved in Triassic cynodonts, but some anatomical features suggest that insulation and elevated metabolic activity may already have evolved within parts of the lineage. These conclusions remain indirect and should not be applied equally to every cynodont species. What is clear is that the mammalian body plan was assembled piece by piece: jaw, teeth, palate, hearing, posture, growth. No single fossil contains the exact moment when a reptile-like ancestor became a mammal. Instead, the Triassic preserves a long anatomical transition. While the first dinosaurs were learning to occupy larger ecological roles, the mammalian lineage was developing through small animals that could live in the spaces the giants rarely entered. But not every surviving synapsid became small. Some remained among the largest herbivores on land. A herd of heavy animals moves across a late Triassic floodplain. Their bodies are massive. The heads carry beaks and, in some species, tusks. These are Dicynodonts, the same broad lineage that produced Lystrosaurus. The appearance of the first dinosaurs did not immediately remove them. In North America, Paleosaurus remained an important large herbivore. Its powerful beak could crop vegetation, while strong jaw muscles processed resistant plant material. Paleosaurus lived alongside ictosaurs, phytosaurs, early dinosaurs, and large pseudosuchian predators. It represented a surviving ecological tradition extending back into the Permian, and some late Triassic Dicynodonts became unexpectedly enormous. In Poland, fossils of Lysowicia revealed a Dicynodont more than 4 meters long and potentially several tons in mass. Its limbs were positioned more directly beneath the body than in many earlier Dicynodonts, helping support its great weight. Lysowicia approached the dimensions of an elephant. It lived at a time when large sauropodomorph dinosaurs were also beginning to expand in size. Its discovery demonstrated that giant herbivorous dinosaurs were not the only large terrestrial plant eaters of the late Triassic. The older synapsid world had not simply disappeared. It continued beside the rising dinosaurian one. These ecosystems were mosaics of old and new. Temnospondal amphibians from ancient lineages waited in the water. Dicynodonts inherited traditions from the Permian. Pseudosuchians dominated many terrestrial predator and herbivore roles. Dinosaurs and pterosaurs represented newer radiations. Small cynodonts were approaching the mammalian condition. Then the climate changed, and the balance between these groups began to shift. In the rocks of Ghost Ranch, New Mexico, paleontologists have uncovered the remains of hundreds of individuals belonging to Coelophysis. It was a slender predatory dinosaur. Its body was lightly built, balanced by a long tail. The narrow skull contained recurved teeth. Its long hind limbs were adapted for rapid bipedal movement, while the forelimbs ended in grasping hands. Coelophysis was not a giant, but its abundance matters more than its size. The bone beds indicate that by the late Triassic, dinosaurs could form a major component of certain terrestrial ecosystems. Why so many individuals died in one location remains uncertain. They may have been brought together by drought, flooding, or repeated accumulation over time. The assemblage does not necessarily prove that Coelophysis hunted in coordinated packs. The fossils also produced one of the most famous claims about dinosaur behavior. Small bones found inside the body cavity of a large specimen were once interpreted as the remains of a juvenile Coelophysis. This led to the idea that the animal was a cannibal. Later analysis showed that the bones lacked diagnostic features of Coelophysis and probably belonged to a small crocodile-line reptile. Coelophysis represents a dinosaur lineage becoming widespread and numerous, while many of its earlier competitors still survived. Had the Triassic continued under stable conditions, the next phase of this competition might have unfolded gradually. But Pangaea was beginning to fracture, and from the cracks came one of the largest volcanic events in Earth's history.